In the hallowed halls of Geneva's International Conference Center, where marble floors gleamed under the weight of history, a moment was unfolding that would ripple across continents and etch itself into the hearts of millions. The Global Development Forum was a grand stage, a carefully choreographed dance of power where world leaders, draped in bespoke suits and practiced smiles, sipped champagne that cost more than the dreams of entire villages. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, prismatic glow over rows of pristine seats, each water glass positioned with surgical precision, each microphone humming with the promise of polished rhetoric. This was no ordinary gathering, it was a theater of global influence, where handshakes sealed billion-dollar deals, and words like shared prosperity floated like confetti, beautiful but weightless. Security was impenetrable metal detectors, X-ray machines, and armed guards who could have stormed a small nation ensured no disruption would mar the event's flawless facade. Yet beneath the surface an electric tension simmered, as if the air itself knew something unprecedented was about to shatter the script. Among the cast of global elites, finance ministers, tech billionaires, and development bank presidents, two figures stood apart, their presence like opposing currents in a swelling storm. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, entered with quiet defiance, his deep green military uniform a stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits. At 35, his eyes carried the weight of a nation's struggles, his rise to power through a coup marking him as both a hero to his people and a puzzle to the West. He arrived without fanfare, no entourage of advisors or press secretaries, just the unyielding resolve of a man who'd seen too much to bow to pretense. Across the room, Donald Trump swept in with the swagger of a man who believed the world revolved around him. His red tie gleamed, his hair was a monument to meticulous care, and his entourage, Secret Service agents, policy advisors, media handlers filled the space like an occupying force. Trump's relationship with Africa was a tangled web of controversy, his past remarks about the continent sparking diplomatic fires, his view of aid as a transactional lever clear to all. To him, every dollar given was a debt owed, every hospital built a favor to be repaid. The morning's panels unfolded predictably, with leaders reciting carefully crafted lines about sustainable development and global partnership, their words as polished as the marble beneath their feet. But as the clock struck 2 p.m., the stage was set for the panel on global responsibility and the future of aid, and the air grew thick with anticipation. The world's most powerful voices gathered around a U-shaped table, their seats, a silent hierarchy, Western leaders at the center, Traoré at the far end, a subtle reminder of who held the reins. The moderator, Klaus Müller, a Swiss diplomat with decades of experience, opened with a question designed to elicit safe, forgettable responses: how to ensure aid respects the sovereignty of nations while fostering lasting change. The Canadian Prime Minister spoke of partnership, the German Chancellor of evidence-based strategies, the Japanese leader of technological innovation, answer a masterclass in saying nothing at all. Then Mueller turned to Trump, and the room held its breath. The silence that followed Trump's name was not one of respect but of bracing for impact. He leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting through the diplomatic haze like a blade through silk. "Let's cut the nonsense," he began, his tone a mix of bravado and exasperation, as he stood, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. "Everyone here knows the truth, but nobody's got the guts to say it. We've poured trillions into Africa's schools, hospitals, roads, clean water, you name it. The US, Europe, Japan, Canada, we've paid for it all. And what do we get? Complaints, criticism, disrespect." The room froze, delegates' faces a gallery of discomfort and fascination. Trump paced now, his gestures broad, his voice rising as if addressing a rally rather than a summit. "Half the infrastructure these leaders used to get here, the airports, the roads, the networks they used to complain about us on social media, we built that. And instead of thanks, we get lectures about neocolonialism, imperialism, exploitation. Give me a break." His eyes locked on Traoré, who sat motionless, his gaze a quiet storm of intensity. "Some of you young revolutionaries think you did it all yourselves, but we handed you progress on a silver platter. The least you could do is say thank you." The words hung heavy, a challenge thrown down like a gauntlet. The moderator, visibly rattled, tried to steer back to policy specifics, but Trump waved him off, his rhetoric a tidal wave sweeping away the room's decorum. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, stared at his hands. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, scribbled furiously in his notebook, but Traoré remained still, his silence louder than Trump's tirade. The audience, diplomats, journalists, observers, sat in stunned silence, phones forgotten, pens stilled, as the weight of Trump's words settled like dust after an explosion. Mueller, desperate to regain control, turned to Traoré. "President Traoré, would you like to respond?" The room held its breath, sensing the pivot of history. Traoré rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his presence commanding without a single dramatic gesture. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but resonant, filling the auditorium with a clarity that needed no amplification. "You gave us money," he said, each word a stone dropped into still water. "This is true." The simplicity disarmed the room, a quiet acknowledgement that set the stage for what followed. "But with every dollar, you took our dignity." The words landed like thunder, a truth so raw it seemed to strip the air from the room. Delegates froze, journalists leaned forward, even the security guards seemed to pause. "And today," Traoré continued, his eyes locked on Trump's, "I return both." The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a void, a moment where time itself seemed to pause. Trump's confident smirk flickered, a crack in his armor, as the weight of Traoré's response sank in. The young president stepped closer to his microphone, his voice steady but now laced with a fire that burned with outrage. "Aid is not charity when it comes with chains. You build hospitals, but you dictate our healthcare policies. You send grain, but you take our gold. You offer loans, but you own our resources. You call it help. We call it a transaction." The room was transfixed, every word a mirror reflecting the uncomfortable truths of decades of aid dynamics. Traoré's stillness was his power, his calm a rebuke to Trump's theatrics. "You speak of gratitude as if we should thank the hand that feeds us while it steals from our children. You demand appreciation for help that costs more than it gives, for assistance that makes us dependent, not free." Trump opened his mouth, then closed it, a rare moment of speechlessness for a man who thrived on having the last word. Traoré's words were not just a response, they were a reckoning, a rewriting of the rules that had governed global power for generations. The moment Traoré sat down, the room exhaled, but the air had changed. The moderator, Klaus Muller, called for a recess, but no one moved, as if afraid to break the spell of what they'd witnessed. Trump's team huddled, whispering frantically about damage control, but what could they say? Traoré's words had cut too deep, their truth too undeniable. Within minutes, phones lit up as clips of the exchange flooded social media, the hashtag #Ayaturn both trending before the session officially ended. Across Africa, from Lagos to Nairobi, people watched the video with a swelling pride, their hearts stirred by a leader who had voiced what they'd felt for decades but never heard spoken so boldly. In Accra, Ghana's president called an emergency cabinet meeting, replaying the clip 3 times before declaring, "This is our moment to redefine what partnership means." In Kenya, students rallied under the banner of the Dignity Doctrine, their chants echoing Traoré's call for respect over charity. In Nigeria, a song titled "Return Both" by a popular artist became an anthem, its lyrics weaving Traoré's words into a cry for sovereignty. The ripple effect was immediate and unstoppable, spreading beyond Africa to Latin America, Asia, and even parts of Europe, where marginalized communities saw their own struggles reflected in Traoré's stand. Indigenous leaders in Bolivia released a video echoing his words, "You cannot save us from problems you created, then demand our gratitude." The phrase dignity-centered development began appearing in policy papers, UN documents, and academic journals, a new framework for a world tired of paternalism. In Berlin, Chancellor Scholz quietly ordered a review of Germany's aid programs, shaken by Traoré's accusation that they fostered dependency rather than empowerment. In Paris, Macron admitted to aides that Traoré had exposed a truth they'd avoided for too long. Even in Washington, where Trump's team scrambled to spin the narrative, diplomats began questioning whether America's aid model was as benevolent as claimed. But the real revolution was in Africa itself. In Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, Traoré faced a barrage of interview requests from global media, yet he remained selective, speaking only to outlets willing to discuss policy over drama. In a BBC interview, he clarified his vision. "We don't reject partnership, we reject the assumption that we are perpetual children needing guidance. True cooperation is between equals, not saviors and saved." A continent began to redefine its place in the global order. The Geneva moment had not just challenged Trump, it had cracked the foundations of a post-colonial system built on unequal power. Traoré's words, delivered with quiet conviction, became a beacon for those who believed dignity was not a gift to be bestowed but a right to be claimed. The emotional weight of his stand resonated in the hearts of millions, from students chanting in Nairobi streets to farmers in Ghana's villages, each feeling the stirrings of a new possibility, a world where respect was not a favor but a baseline. The confrontation, though brief, was a spark that ignited a fire, its flames spreading through social media, policy debates, and grassroots movements. Each post, speech, and rally a testament to a truth long suppressed but now unleashed. The world's leaders, caught off guard by this shift, grappled with the realization that the old script of global diplomacy, where the West dictated terms and the rest complied, was unraveling, and Traoré, with his unwavering gaze and measured words, had become its unlikely architect. The aftermath of Geneva was a tapestry of upheaval and awakening, woven with threads of hope, defiance, and introspection. In the days that followed, the video of Traoré's response looped endlessly across screens. Its 3 sentences: "You gave us money, but with every dollar you took our dignity. And today, I return both," becoming a rallying cry that transcended borders. In African capitals, the reaction was electric. In Lagos, university students gathered in dormitories, their faces illuminated by phone screens, watching the clip with a mix of awe and pride, their cheers drowning out the hum of generators. In Addis Ababa, elders sat in quiet cafes, nodding as they discussed how Traoré had spoken for generations, silenced by the weight of history. In Johannesburg, artists painted murals of a green-clad figure standing tall, his words scrawled in bold letters beneath. "I return both." The phrase became a hashtag, a song lyric, a protest chant, a prayer whispered by those who had long felt invisible. Beyond Africa, the impact was just as profound. In Bolivia, indigenous activists held vigils, their voices echoing Traoré's call for dignity as they demanded fair treatment from international NGOs. In Bangladesh, student leaders questioned why their nation accepted aid tied to foreign agendas, their debates spilling into the streets. Even in Europe, where aid had long been a badge of moral superiority, young activists began to ask uncomfortable questions. Was their generosity truly selfless, or was it a tool to maintain control? The emotional resonance of Traoré's words lay in their universality. They spoke to anyone who had ever felt diminished by a system that claimed to help while holding them down. In Western capitals, the response was a mix of defensiveness and soul-searching. In Berlin, Chancellor Scholz's emergency meeting with his development ministers was not just a policy discussion but a reckoning, as they confronted the possibility that their aid programs had perpetuated dependency rather than progress. "We meant to help," one minister whispered, "but did we harm instead?" In Paris, Macron's private admission to his aides that Traoré had exposed a truth they'd ignored sparked quiet reforms, with France rethinking its ties to former colonies. In Washington, Trump's team struggled to regain footing, their usual playbook of counterattacks and spin rendered useless against Traoré's crystalline clarity. Fox News attempted to paint Traoré as ungrateful, but the segment backfired, its patronizing tone only amplifying his point. Leaders, from Al Sharpton to Oprah Winfrey, rallied behind Traoré, framing his stand as a universal call for equality. The emotional undercurrent of these reactions was palpably longer at decades of condescension, hope for a new paradigm, and a quiet fear that this moment might slip away if not seized. In Africa, the practical changes were swift. Ghana's president announced plans to renegotiate aid agreements, prioritizing national sovereignty over donor demands. Kenya's dignity doctrine rallies grew into a movement, with students drafting policy proposals for self-reliant development. Artists and influencers turned Traoré's words into cultural touchstones, their music and art carrying his message to millions. The African Dignity Fund, launched with $50 billion from governments, diaspora communities, and private investors, became a symbol of possibility. Its first project, a solar grid across the Sahel, proof that Africa could lead its own future. The emotional weight of these actions was not just in their outcomes, but in their defiance of a narrative that had long cast Africa as a continent in need of saving. Traoré's stand had given voice to a collective yearning for respect, and that yearning was now reshaping reality, one policy, one project, one heart at a time. The global stage, once dominated by the West's self-assured narrative, began to crack under the weight of Traoré's truth. His words in Geneva were not just a response to Trump but a challenge to an entire system, a system that had, for decades, cloaked control in the guise of charity. The emotional impact of this challenge was felt in the quiet moments as much as the loud ones, in the hushed conversations between diplomats who now questioned their assumptions, in the tearful pride of African parents watching their children march for dignity, in the sleepless nights of Western leaders grappling with their complicity in a broken model. In the months that followed, the dignity doctrine became more than a slogan. It became a framework for reimagining international relations. Universities from Harvard to Lagos offered courses on dignity-centered development, their lecture halls filled with students eager to dismantle the old hierarchies. Policy institutes, once bastions of Western-centric thinking, published papers questioning the ethics of conditional aid. Even militaries, often silent on such matters, began incorporating dignity principles into their peacekeeping training, recognizing that true partnership required respect, not dominance. In Africa, the changes were tangible. A Kenyan startup, born from the rejection of Western seed monopolies, developed drought-resistant crops that transformed East African farming, creating jobs and food security without a single foreign loan. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's government launched a national campaign to promote local innovation. Its slogan, "Our Hands, Our Future," a direct echo of his Geneva speech. The emotional core of these initiatives was empowerment, a belief that Africa's potential had always been there, waiting to be unleashed. Yet, not everyone embraced the shift. Western corporations, from oil giants like TotalEnergies to pharmaceutical companies, felt the ground shift beneath their profits. Leaked memos revealed their panic. The Traoré effect threatened preferential deals as African nations like Chad and Gabon began reviewing extractive contracts. China, ever opportunistic, stepped into the fray, offering partnerships without the strings of Western aid. Their commerce minister's words, "We don't ask you to change your systems," a subtle jab at the West's paternalism. The emotional tension here was stark. Western leaders faced a choice between doubling down on old models or admitting their flaws, a choice that carried the weight of history and the gaze of a generation demanding change. In the US, Trump's silence grew louder than his usual bluster, his brand of unyielding strength faltering against Traoré's quiet power. Young Republican leaders, sensing a shift, began advocating for a new American leadership, one that empowered rather than patronized. The emotional undercurrent was one of discomfort, a nation forced to confront its own contradictions. Across the global south, Traoré's words became a spark for broader movements. In Bangladesh, protests against Tide aid gained momentum, students chanting, "No more chains." In Bolivia, indigenous communities demanded partnerships, not pity. The Geneva moment had become a global mirror, reflecting the pain of those who had been diminished and the hope of those who now saw a path forward. Traoré himself remained a figure of quiet resolve, refusing to bask in the spotlight. In a rare CNN interview, he spoke not of victory but of responsibility. "This is not about me. It's about a continent tired of being told who we are instead of who we can be." His words carried the weight of a man who had spoken for millions, their dreams and frustrations now given voice. The ripple effects of Geneva continued to reshape the world, but they also revealed the challenges of sustaining such a moment. The emotional high of Traoré's stand gave way to the hard work of implementation, renegotiating aid agreements, building local capacity, and convincing a skeptical world that Africa could lead without Western crutches. In Ouagadougou, Traoré faced mounting pressure. Media outlets clamored for soundbites. Allies urged him to capitalize on his fame, and critics both Western and African questioned whether his vision was realistic. Think tanks like the Heritage Foundation labeled his approach aid nationalism, warning of economic instability, while African elites, comfortable with the status quo, whispered doubts about his radicalism. Yet, the emotional pulse of his movement remained strong. In South Africa, a continental summit dubbed Dignity and Development drew leaders from across Africa, their declaration outlining concrete steps, trade agreements to reduce reliance on Western markets, technology transfers to build local expertise, and resource policies to ensure fair compensation. The African Dignity Fund grew, its investments in renewable energy and education sparking hope in communities long resigned to despair. In Senegal, a young engineer, inspired by Traoré's speech, developed a low-cost solar panel, her invention lighting up villages that had never known electricity. In Nigeria, a fintech startup bypassed Western banking systems, empowering small businesses to thrive without foreign loans. These stories, small but seismic, carried an emotional weight that rivaled the Geneva moment itself, a sense that dignity was not just a word but a force, capable of building futures where dependency had once stood. The global response was mixed. Western media often framed Africa's push for self-reliance as naive, their headlines tinged with the same condescension Traoré had decried. But voices like Thomas Friedman's in the New York Times offered a different view. This is not anti-Western sentiment, but pro-African confidence. The emotional divide was clear. Some saw a threat, others a promise. In the global South, the promise won out. From Latin America to Southeast Asia, communities began adopting the Geneva Principles: dignity, sovereignty, mutual respect, as a blueprint for their own struggles. In Bolivia, indigenous leaders met with African diplomats to share strategies. Their laughter and tears, a testament to a shared fight. In India, activists cited Traoré in campaigns against exploitative trade deals, their voices carrying the same fire that had silenced Geneva's auditorium. Even in Western universities, students debated the ethics of aid, their discussions a quiet rebellion against the systems their parents had built. The emotional heart of this moment was a universal hunger for respect, a recognition that dignity was not a luxury but a necessity. Traoré's own words, in a UN speech 6 months later, crystallized this. Dignity is not an African issue, it is a human issue. The standing ovation, led by delegates from the global South but joined by some from the West, lasted nearly 5 minutes, a moment of unity born from a truth too long ignored. The legacy of Geneva is still unfolding, a testament to the power of a single voice to shift the tides of history. Traoré's stand was not just a moment but a movement, its emotional core rooted in the courage to speak truth to power. It challenged leaders to rethink their roles, corporations to reassess their profits, and ordinary people to reclaim their worth. In Burkina Faso, schools now teach dignity-centered development alongside math and history, their students learning that progress begins with self-respect. In Kenya, farmers who once relied on foreign seeds now share their harvests with pride, their fields a symbol of sovereignty reclaimed. In the West, the discomfort lingers, a quiet admission that the old ways where aid came with strings and gratitude was demanded may no longer hold. The emotional weight of this shift is felt in the stories that continue to emerge. A doctor building a hospital without foreign funds, a Nigerian coder creating an app to connect African markets, a Bolivian elder teaching her community to demand partnership, not pity. Traoré himself remains a figure of quiet strength, his speech is now focused on building rather than confronting, his vision one of partnership between equals. We do not reject help, he told the UN, but we reject the assumption that help requires our diminishment. The world, once content to see Africa as a continent in need, now watches with a mix of awe and unease as it rises, its people emboldened by a truth spoken in Geneva: dignity cannot be given, only recognized. The emotional resonance of this truth continues to inspire, from the streets of Ouagadougou to the halls of global power, a reminder that when one voice dares to speak what millions feel, the ground beneath us all begins to shift. The question now is not whether this moment will change the world, it already has, but how far its ripples will reach, and whether we, as a global community, will choose dignity over dominance, partnership over paternalism, truth over silence.